We're here at High Hopes on May 30th, 2023, for a conversation to add to our High Hopes oral and video history of the organization, and as part of a kickoff of our 50th anniversary celebrations. And we're here with Jeff and Holly Ridgway. And I don't know, Jeff and Holly, do you want to just start by introducing yourselves and just maybe telling us when and how you got involved at High Hopes?
Well, when we moved to the area in '79, so the summer of '79, we were married that spring, and I was recruited by Ann Wright, actually, who was then the very first instructor for High Hopes, and it recruited to volunteer. And at that time, the program was operating out of Race Hill Farm, and I'm sure probably still Citizen Lit's backyard as well. But my initial involvement was at Race Hill. And I had already been teaching riding myself, and had grown up and ridden all my life, so it was a
And that was your
natural
connection
fit.
with Ann Wright? That's how she found you? It was like, oh, you're a horsey person.
Exactly.
Okay.
She was very good at recruiting. Yeah.
She was a character, that's for sure.
And Jeff, what was your first involvement?
My recollection was helping out at the occasional horse show that happened at, and I guess my first memory would have been Baldwin Stables, which was not Baldwin.
Seahorse Farm.
That was Carol Libby's.
Yeah.
Well, she was not Carol Libby, she was whatever. And Johnny Edwards and her husband, Ash, and I were hanging over the fence or leaning on the fence or whatever and watching the stuff and doing whatever we were asked to do, leading a horse or something or other. And that was my first introduction. And then Cricklewood or whatever, I remember.
Well, we were always begging
there.
and borrowing and snitching ring time and equipment and horses from 4 or 5 different barns as a nomadic tribe. And volunteers would ship horses in. Patty Peoples brought Dear Apple forever and ever, and Marion LeQuinn brought in Bee, and Renee McIntyre even brought her big horse in, and there were a number of them.
And so it sounds like it was probably also logistical, like putting together the puzzle pieces of where the riders were or where they could get to, as opposed to whose backyard or ring you could use, and then how the horses were going to come in.
Yeah. Betty Green's Essex Elementary class was one of probably the earliest one.
Better.
Yeah. And I'm not sure of the exact year, but the Sarah group became involved.
And when you think back to those first horse shows and those first lessons, how many was it one-on-one riders with the instructor and the rider, or how many participants would be in a class?
When I initially volunteered, there were probably 4 or 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ben Christensen was.
Carrie Christensen was one of our earliest riders, and Kurt Zeman,
and then Holly, when did you make the jump, and what made you think of I want to transition from you were a volunteer instructor, or you were a volunteer sidewalker and horse leader?
Sidewalker, horse leader for I guess a couple of years, and then Anne needed. She asked me to sub for her, and that was when the program, I think, was at the Westbrook Hunt Club on Monday evenings. And it was a natural transition. I'd been teaching there anyway, and I knew some of the school horses that we had access to, and then it just grew from there.
Yeah. And actually, I seem to remember, you jog my memory, Anne Wright, we did something up at the farm in East Haddam,
That's right, there was some
Or Salem, maybe
sort
there's
of
Salem
a
almost.
fundraiser.
And which farm would this have been?
This would have been Anne's
It
Anne's
was
farm.
Anne
I don't
had a
recall.
farm.
Frank
that.
Wolcott's house, and they had a number of acres and maybe a stable. I don't remember that part.
Yeah, she had
Mm.
horses at home, so
I do remember going
Johnny
up there.
would be a better source for that.
Yeah.
She'd remember.
And could it be, was it sometimes a very kind of, okay, we have this location this week, we can ride here, or was it at least kind of scheduled, no, every week you're going to be here? And
Yeah,
you're
they
going-
tried to schedule it because it would depend upon what ring time we were offered at various facilities and whether they had an indoor facility too. Sometimes it was weather dependent, obviously, with the outdoor situations.
And then Holly, when you did make the jump from volunteering as a sidewalker to stepping in as an instructor and helping Anne, was there any kind of certification process back then, or how were you even learning about the field of therapeutic riding?
Well, Anne was offering books and so on that we were encouraged to
Sorry.
to read. And there were, I'm trying to think back, there were various conferences that we'd go to. I'm not exactly sure what year the national organization, which was then NARA, when that started, but we would go to the annual meetings and there were all kinds of seminars.
Yeah, because I think it was in 1979 that LC Vera was PATH NARA accredited. So,
Okay.
and so
Okay.
when you,
Right.
so the field existed.
Mm-hmm.
The field existed. You did have some resources and support for
Yeah.
how to.
And locally, Nat Bieber, who was a special ed, she lived in fact, she lived on Town Woods Road. And she would do seminars for us as a special ed teacher, yeah, and horse person. Yeah.
And then, Jeff, your involvement has been on a facility, and like you said, helping out, rolling up your sleeves and helping out at a horse show. Sounds like it kicked it all
That was,
off.
I grew up with horses, so I had a little bit of understanding of that, but I was in the building trade, and Herb Clark was the chair of the building committee, and Reeves Potts was a sort of major driving force, and I just volunteered in any way I could.
And this is specifically Herb Clark and Reeves Potts. This is the big transition where the organization is going from nomadic backyards and trailers to the thought of we need
Yeah.
our own
Yeah.
facility.
I think Sis and Lit definitely realized that there was enough of a demand for the services we were offering and that we really needed our own facility because it was, being at other properties, it wasn't always consistent and there would be cancellations and so we just wanted to be able to offer a more consistent service. And they
that
knew
effort,
the Jesse and
Is it Pierce?
no, the family who owned the property. I'm sure
Yeah,
the Roberts.
Roberts.
this
thank
property
you.
where we are now
Yes.
on
And
Town Woods Road.
They
Yes.
sold it to
And
the
Lit-
organization.
Lit and Sis knew them.
And they were wonderful because we would basically make the payment of mortgage every year and they'd give it right back, which was so. And
And
that
so-
happened throughout until the mortgage was paid.
And so that would have been the mid 80s that the discussion starts about buying the property and how to
I would
fund it.
Very likely.
Again, I don't.
I mean, if we work our way back, that this facility that we're in, or this property now, the official opening was 1990.
Yes, I'm fairly certain of that.
So it would have been kind of the mid 80s. It's starting to talk, and you're
It happened
with
quickly.
Reeves.
Reeves
It
was
did- okay.
oh my God, yeah. I mean, Stockade was the company that had this barn, and there was a guy from Killingworth, and I can't remember his name now, who was the actual builder. and it just happened so quickly. I mean,
And
it
Tom
was just-
Elliott,
he
Kristen's
was
dad,
the
original,
architect,
yeah.
or he made some modifications, I should say. I think a lot of it was a stock barn construction.
And at that point, as instructors, did you already know, like, we need a mounting ramp, we need the wheelchair lift? Were those things already in plan, or was it, we need a ring in a barn, we need a ring in
It was
stalls?
a ring in a
Or-
barn.
Ring in a barn initially, and
And I remember helping design the
ramp.
the mounting ramp, which was, you know, one of the most important things was, of course, to have the whole thing fold away so that as you're riding around the rink, you didn't collect or someone wouldn't run into the mounting ramp.
and to be wheelchair accessible.
And then we had
obviously.
to have the wheelchair accessible, and then someone pointed out to us that, of course, it wasn't exactly ADA, but it was only so much space we had between the two doors, so, and riding wasn't exactly ADA, so.
And do you remember, were there any other facilities that you could look at? Were there any other therapeutic riding centers that you could call up, or you could look at, of like, how did you guys do it? Or was this pretty much the first? Were you,
As far as we're concerned, it was the first, but
They existed,
There's
but they
certainly-
weren't,
yeah.
nothing local, I mean,
no, nothing that we
Yeah.
knew of.
yeah.
But
the
we were
Midwest.
thinking, you know, you gotta have a bunch of horses, you gotta have some stables, and you gotta have an arena.
Yeah.
So that's really how that sort of came about.
and if you had to ballpark, if you think about back to some of those original meetings about buying the property and how many people would you say were,
I have no
Involved.
idea, you're
are
asking
you,
the wrong,
you know,
I have no
are
idea.
you, okay. I mean, are you sitting in a room with 30 people trying to work out how to make,
Never sat in a room,
Well,
no,
oh, there was no
There
room to
was-
sit in.
exactly.
true. I mean, there
Exactly.
was a board of directors at that point.
Right,
So-
we had some drinks up at Sis and Let's, but nothing that I remember, any formal. I'm not saying that there wasn't, I'm sure there was, but certainly in our recollection.
Mm.
Well, speaking of going and having a drink or two, do you recall some of the early ways people gathered to fund the organization?
Well, of course,
And
Symphony in the Meadows, 1982, at the Hamiltons on Selden Road.
And that would have been in
It
line.
was very much a memory that I have, and I'm sure Holly
Yeah,
does
now
too.
that was the first major,
And it was pretty well
fundraiser.
organized.
Yeah.
Auction.
yeah.
Do you know how the idea to have the symphony there came about?
I
Well,
thought
Dick was on the board
Dick Lightfoot, yeah.
at New Haven Symphony,
Okay.
and there
Yeah.
were some other local characters who were also, so it made it relatively easy for them to say, here's a date.
And for those people who never had the pleasure of going to a symphony in the Meadows, can you just describe the way the night ran, the layout and the way the night was presented?
Well, it varied from property to property, because the Lightfoots had it, Griswold Point had it one year, and other than the original, I don't think it happened more than once at the Hamiltons. I don't really, it may have,
Yeah.
I just don't remember. I remember the first one.
It was always pretty magical, and I think there
Oh,
were,
yeah.
you know, the committees were working hard, get local restaurants and to donate hors d'oeuvres that
Yeah.
volunteers passed, and picnic dinners, and people probably brought their own chairs, and
Yep.
but it
Blankets
was,
sat in the grass.
we were
and-
blessed with some good weather most of the time. Always a little unreliable in June, but no,
Yeah.
it was a magical. And then it progressed later on to the Winkelmans, which, you know, we all
Made it more
miss
formal.
that.
But it was
Yeah.
still every other year.
Yeah,
It was every other year. And so if you had to guess, what size group do you think was at the Hamiltons that first year?
I don't think
Maybe
there were more than a few
100?
hundred people.
Yeah.
Wasn't that big a
100
garden.
150 maybe, 100, 200, I don't know.
You know, they did have a stage for the symphony orchestra.
Yeah.
Because then the final symphony, I think attendance was, we were getting up there at 650,
About 600, yeah.
600 people.
Yeah, maybe almost 700. The Winklemans, I remember parking was an issue. We had to get buses or something or other to bring people in, and that was an interesting.
And I think none of us will ever forget also standing there and just watching the big thunderheads roll
yeah.
down the
Oh, yeah.
Connecticut River
Yeah.
and the lightning and the.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the symphony orchestra was almost packing up their instruments, and the conductor was saying, "Ah!" And I remember going and showing him with my phone the radar. I said, "Look, it's done. Whatever's happening there is going away, and we'll not have to worry about it." What they did stick to it, so that was pretty magical. But it also made us say, "Well,
Yeah.
this is
We have to
sticking our
reevaluate.
necks out."
Right.
You know, we've got to think about, because at one time, the decision was made to not have it outside. We did it here. And everyone came away saying, "Oh my God, the acoustics in the arena are fabulous." Even the New Haven Symphony people were all, so that propelled us saying, well, maybe we should think more seriously about doing it here. And then we did the antiques show, and the Sayers were Oriental rug people who were in the antique world, and they had suggested us doing an antique show here, and they bought a carpet, 16,000 square feet of carpet for the indoor arena. We put the carpet down. And then they said, well, you know, it gets chilly in November. We're going to have heat. So we hired 3 massive mobile heating plants and cut holes in the building and ran ducting around. And oh my God, that was just amazing. We had all those booths, and I think we had some really amazing antique dealers, and of course they'd all say, well, we didn't really make any money, but we did very well. And then we decided that 10 days of shutting the program down, because it shut, we had to build everything and then take everything apart in order for these guys to have their little booths, and
It interrupted the program for
it was too much.
Too long. And
But we had the carpet. So we decided we would do fundraisers here.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also decided that, you know, this is crazy. We might lose our opportunity within the local communities, non-profits doing their fundraisers in June, if we don't lock into our weekend. And so that made it every single year.
And it brought people to see the facility.
Yeah.
which is
Right,
great.
as opposed to symphony, which has always
Yeah.
been every other
Yeah.
year.
We went from symphony to band. We had big
Well, it was
Well,
Judy
weren't
Collins.
there
Judy
the
Collins was the
concerts?
first one.
There was
Wasn't
two
there
concerts
a-
in the barn.
Concerts first,
That's
and then
right,
the
concert in the
concerts
barn.
transitioned into. party.
Judy,
Yeah. Judy Collins,
Collins,
and Rita
and that was-
Coolidge.
she was this very sort of white person, as it were, because she had grey hair and the lights were on her, and she breathed in a moth or something or other while she's sitting at the piano. And she went off for a couple of seconds and was coughing away, and then she came back and she carried on. God bless her. But you remember that?
Yeah.
That was, what else? Who did we have? Susie
Susie Bogus.
Bogus.
The
Rita
Kingston
Coolidge.
Trio?
Kingston Trio.
Yeah.
Big bad voodoo daddy.
That's when
That was and I
the
think
swing
that
band.
kind of starts to mark the transition into a dinner dance format rather than a
Concert.
concert.
Yeah,
Yeah,
true.
yes.
Um, and then just getting back to kind of the early days of the organization, but also this property. Well, you had started to tell me earlier before we started talking and being recorded, but when you first drove on to this property, there was nothing here.
No,
It's
no.
just a big
it was,
hayfield.
Big hayfield.
The
Sam
ponds
Harding,
didn't
who had the
exist.
farm up the hill there,
Where
Sam said,
Ashland
"Oh, that's the best
Farm Coffee
hay land in the area, because it's fairly low. It's got a lot of topsoil. There's a high water table, so the grass grew like crazy. But we put an end to that. No more hay being made here, right?
Yeah.
And then, do you have any favorite memories, Holly, from being in program, from being in class? Any favorite funny memories you can think about from being in the barn?
Oh gosh, there are probably too many.
Horses.
Do you
I'm thinking-
remember do you remember teaching your first lesson here in
In the facility?
this facility?
Um, I was
a Monday
always
evening,
Monday
wasn't it?
evenings, yeah, so it would have been Lisa Adrian and Lisa Boyd and Carrie Christensen, a lot of the younger adults who would come in the evenings. And boy, that went on for years and years.
Lindsay Bowles wasn't quite, she was about 94, I think, Jane said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, still riding today. Yeah, yeah.
And Jeff, do you have any memories of all of the benefits that you helped construct and,
I
like
think
you were saying, mounting wooden moons from ceilings in the barn and
There was some pretty amazing ones, some that probably I shouldn't talk about, but was you at having Special Olympics here, World Games, 1995, and we already started to remodel the place, and we had 2 big trailers out there, and we had 174 quarter horses in 2 massive tents down the pasture. We didn't have all the paddocks in those days. We only had a few, and that was amazing, absolutely amazing. People from all over the world competing in the equestrian games.
And
Yeah.
where did those horses? They were borrowed.
The
horses,
American AQHA, American Quarter Horse Association, I guess contacted local,
They-
Connecticut and Massachusetts,
All
Rhode
over.
Island barns,
All
and
over. It was,
yeah,
from all over
shipped
the
them in
place.
from all over.
The
The Northeast.
main Special Olympics people obviously pulled some strings and went to the AQHA people and said, can you supply us God knows how many horses? And that was,
The logistics was just
oh my
incredible.
God, it was
And
amazing,
was that
absolutely amazing.
a 1-day event, a 1-week event? Do you remember?
It was a week.
It was through the week, yeah.
Holly has some fond memories
And
of
I
that.
was coaching the Connecticut team, and they had us living at Fairfield University, and we had to be transported. Initially, they had us coming by train out of New Haven, or out of Fairfield, up to Saybrook, and then we realized that wasn't working so well, so they actually gave me a car so I could transport the team here daily.
And how many riders were on your team? What was?
There were 4 active, I think there were 6 altogether,
Okay.
and I had an assistant coach, and we had a dry run before the actual World Games took place in '95. That spring, up in Hartford, they had a dry run for all of the events, not just the equestrian events. And there were some really interesting moments, and the dynamics among the riders, just very,
Yeah.
very funny things.
Well, then,
Yeah.
and then you throw unknown horses into the equation because they
Yes.
have
Oh,
their
yeah.
personalities
Oh, yeah.
And
too.
we as the coaches didn't know the horses, so it was challenging, but it all worked out.
And the riders, particularly.
Yeah, that's right.
But you
But
have
some of the riders came from other programs, from Pegasus and
yeah.
other programs. Yeah, I
So
think
we were
had.
remodeling the facility, and the World Games was happening here. And it was just like, oh my Lord, hang on to your hats. And it was pretty hairy
It was
stuff,
a busy
frankly.
week. It was a busy week.
Yeah.
And just as local residents, do you remember was that event and was High Hopes in general, were people aware of the organization? Were they, was it on their radar? Were people-
Not as much as we had hoped. I think the World Games really introduced this facility to a lot of local people who really didn't know we
Yeah.
were here.
Yeah.
Of course, the facility had already been here for 4 or 5 years.
Yep. Oh, at least 5
So,
years, because it was
yeah.
1995.
Yeah.
I mean, the antique shows were 90, might have been 93, but definitely 94 and 95. And the various fundraisers was the other way that outsiders, as it were, would find out about us. And then we had, we remodeled this, and then we built the caretaker cottage, which helped. And then of the property to be hard, in other words, buildings and driveways and
Okay.
things. And the expansion was going to exceed that. And out of nowhere came the Guitar family, who had 62 acres, landlocked, but happened to abut us. And after some serious negotiation, they sold us 62 acres for $50,000 and gave us the extra land to be able to go to the Department of Agriculture saying, well, we've got 125 acres or whatever it was, and so we could do the addition, which was in 2000.
And was the Guitars property, is that the property where the Sensory Trail and Critter Rock are now, or is that?
No,
I think it's beyond.
it's beyond. It
Okay.
sort of abuts up at the top of Critter Rock and goes over and around to Matson's Ridge.
So
Pretty
you're-
extensive, but it's completely landlocked. Didn't have any road access at
Yeah.
all.
We
We
were-
were it.
We were able to add the extra paddocks down
Yeah,
at the end.
Yeah.
Extra paddocks and do the facility expansion to then have
that
a
was the
program
important thing.
office, a classroom,
That
a
was-
kitchen.
Yeah.
Exactly,
And expand the trail
Let-
system.
exactly.
Yeah.
Storage shed, we built that, and then various other sheds happened on the property. So we could, have enough land to be able to satisfy the Department of Agriculture, which was interesting and challenging. And then 2000 was major, having the additional facility with a classroom and a therapy room and a library and all of the, volunteer lounge, family lounge here, an entrance that really accommodated everyone, and it's still very special. And Sally Aubrey was just amazing. She was the one who picked out the color scheme for everything. God bless her. So,
And from my first involvement here at High Hopes, I feel like for at least the first 15 years I volunteered here, she was usually the face volunteering at the front,
At the desk.
at the
Yeah.
desk.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. She
When
knew
you
all the
arrived.
riders coming through,
Oh, yeah.
and their families.
What
Yeah.
are you doing here?
Yeah. It was wonderful. She was a
was.
wonderful horsewoman in her own right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, we pinch
then
ourselves every day, to this day,
Mm.
to have this facility is just extraordinary.
And the people who made it happen.
Yep.
And some extraordinary people, from Sis to Judy to Janie,
Mhm.
Sally, all of those truly amazing people. We all learned so much from them.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
inspiring.
Well, and that, for me, inspiring in that not only did they have the creativity and the motivation and the fire to even start the organization and get it up and running, but to stick with it and
Mhm.
to
Continue to
steward
fund
it
to,
and
exactly.
manage it in a responsible way that
Right, exactly.
allowed it
Yeah.
to grow. So
And to see to it that it
Hopefully.
continues. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the Kresge Foundation was a major stepstone for us because they gave us the funding to do the 2000 edition. Only we had to meet very stringent requirements of theirs, which were really, can't do anything until you raised all the funds. And we've stuck with that. We've never done anything without having the money. We've never been out, with a bank loan or anything, which is pretty extraordinary.
all right. Well,
Mhm.
this is your last chance to get in any silly or funny stories or any last thoughts or anything that perhaps I haven't covered that.
I'm sure we'll think of something
Oh,
on the way
yeah.
home.
I'll have to
Well,
sit
then we'll
down
just
with
call this
Johnny.
part one.
Part one,
Okay.
there
We'll
you
call
go.
this part one,
To be
and
continued.
then we'll do a to be continued card.
Well, hopefully
Yeah.
this will also provoke memories from other people that
Yes.
you're going to interview, because I think there are a lot of stories,
Yeah.
good stories.
Well, good. Well,
Johnny
thank
will
you,
have
because this
something.
is a big, big part of starting to capture them. So thank you very
Good.
much for talking
Well,
to us
thank
today.
you for
Thank
doing
you for
this.
doing
Yeah.
this, Jackie
Yeah.
and David.
Yeah,